What you're about to see has never happened before in the post-Cold War era, and most of the media is barely talking about it. A Russian military drone just struck a residential apartment building inside Romania. Romania, a full NATO member state. This is not a drill. This is not speculation. This is confirmed by Romania's own Ministry of Defense, and right now, the most powerful country in that alliance, the United States, has said absolutely nothing. Let that sink in for a second. Because what happens in the next 48 to 72 hours could either reinforce NATO's credibility as the most powerful military alliance on the planet, or begin to expose cracks that America's adversaries have been waiting years to exploit. Stay with me, because this story is developing fast, and there is a lot you need to understand. We are going to go through the confirmed facts, the military context, the political fallout, and what all of this actually means for the future of European security. Here's what we know so far. Overnight, a Russian one-way attack drone entered Romanian airspace during what Moscow described as a strike campaign targeting neighboring Ukraine. Romanian air defense tracked the drone after it crossed into national territory. Two F-16 Fighting Falcon jets launched from the 86th Air Base in Fătești, backed by a Romanian Air Force IAR-330 SOCAT helicopter. The pilots were authorized to engage, but before they could intercept, the drone slammed into a residential apartment block in the eastern Romanian city of Galați, located roughly 13.5 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. At least 2 people were confirmed injured immediately following the impact. Authorities evacuated around 70 residents from the building as a fire broke out across multiple floors. Emergency crews raced to the scene. Open-source intelligence analysts quickly identified the weapon as a Russian Geran 2, also known internationally as the Shahed 136. An Iranian-designed loitering munition that Russia has been deploying extensively throughout its campaign against Ukraine's cities and critical infrastructure. These are not sophisticated precision weapons. They are slow, cheap, and designed to overwhelm air defenses through sheer volume. Russia launches them in swarms, and sometimes they drift. Except this time, one didn't just drift near the border. It hit a building where people were sleeping. Romania's Ministry of Defense released a formal statement confirming the drone strike. Prior to impact, air raid alerts had been issued across parts of eastern Romania as the drone was being tracked inside Romanian airspace. Romania has repeatedly found drone wreckage and debris on its soil over the past 2 years. There have been multiple documented incidents, but those were pieces of hardware landing in fields. This is categorically different. This is a direct confirmed impact on a civilian residential structure. That distinction matters enormously under international law, under NATO protocols, and under the basic moral framework that the entire Western security order is supposed to rest on. Now here's the part of this story that is going to matter most geopolitically. Article 5 of the NATO treaty is the famous Mutual Defense Clause. An attack on one is an attack on all. But Article 4 is what gets activated first. It's the consultation mechanism. Under Article 4, any member nation can call for formal talks within the North Atlantic Council whenever it believes its territorial integrity, political independence, or national security is being threatened. It triggers information sharing, coordinated planning, and potential non-military measures. It is the mandatory first step before Article 5 even comes into the conversation. And right now, the question being asked in defense circles across Europe is, if this doesn't activate Article 4, what on earth would? Multiple defense analysts and former military officials are already calling for Article 4 to be triggered immediately. Dr. Malcolm Davis, a prominent defense researcher, went further, writing that given the direct strike on a NATO member's civilian infrastructure, this situation may actually already meet the threshold for Article 5, at minimum requiring a significant forward deployment of NATO forces into Romania to strengthen its eastern flank. His warning is direct. A failure to respond firmly will invite more Russian strikes, because Moscow has been calculating, correctly so far, that there is no real price to pay for these incidents. Every time NATO absorbs an incident and moves on without a formal response, that silence becomes a permission slip for the next one. Analyst Yaroslav Trif put it bluntly. Russia may not have deliberately targeted Romania, but in planning its strikes against Ukraine, the Kremlin simply does not care if Romania gets hit occasionally. The calculus is cold. As long as NATO doesn't respond meaningfully, this behavior will continue. And the drone strikes aren't going to stop getting closer. They're going to keep drifting further into alliance territory until someone finally pays a real cost. Or until a strike kills enough people that the political pressure to respond becomes impossible to ignore. So where is the United States' response? Where is the White House condemnation? Where is the statement from the National Security Council, from the Pentagon, from anyone in the current administration who has the authority to speak to the security of a NATO ally that just took a direct hit from Russian ordnance? As of the time of this video, Donald Trump's most recent social media activity, posted roughly 8 hours before this attack made international headlines, was a comment about non-functioning fountains. Before that, he shared an AI-generated image of a reflecting pool. Nothing about Romania. Nothing about a NATO ally being struck. Nothing. This silence is not just a public relations problem. It is a strategic signal. When the leader of the most powerful nation in the NATO alliance goes quiet after a member state gets hit by a Russian drone, every country in Eastern Europe notices. Every defense ministry along NATO's eastern flank notices. And Moscow absolutely notices. Silence in moments like this is not neutral. It communicates something. And what it communicates right now is deeply concerning. Think about what that means practically. The Baltic states are watching. Poland is watching. Finland and Sweden, both relatively new NATO members, are watching. These are countries that share borders with Russia or Belarus. Countries that have spent the last 3 years rapidly expanding their defense budgets and accelerating military cooperation with the alliance precisely because they understand that Russian expansionism does not stop unless it is stopped. When they look at Washington right now and see nothing, no statement, no phone call to Bucharest, no emergency session called, they have to ask themselves the same uncomfortable question. If it happened to us, would the response be any different? That question does not have a reassuring answer tonight. Now let's zoom out and look at the broader battlefield picture, because this strike on Romania does not exist in a vacuum. It is happening at a moment of significant shift in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. For much of the past 2 years, this war looked like a grinding stalemate, slow territorial attrition, limited breakthroughs on either side. That characterization no longer holds. According to the Institute for the Study of War's most recent assessment, Ukraine is actively challenging the positional character of the conflict that has dominated fighting since 2023. Kiev is no longer simply holding the line, it is taking the initiative. In recent weeks, Ukrainian forces launched major drone raids deep into southern Russia. Reports from Russian military channels confirm that Ukrainian heavy cruise missiles, described as Flamingo-class long-range weapons, were tracked flying toward the Volga River Valley, far behind what anyone would consider the immediate front. In a separate operation, a Ukrainian mid-range drone struck 2 Russian fuel tankers traveling on the critical R-280 supply highway deep in Russian-held territory. Both tankers caught fire and blocked the road, disrupting a key logistics artery. These are not symbolic strikes. These are operations designed to degrade Russia's ability to sustain its military campaign, cutting fuel, severing supply lines, and forcing Russian commanders to divert resources to protecting infrastructure that was previously considered safely out of range. What makes Ukraine's recent operational tempo particularly significant is not just the individual strikes, it is the pattern. Ukraine has shifted from a reactive posture to a proactive one. Instead of simply absorbing Russian attacks and trying to hold territory, Ukrainian commanders are now consistently forcing Russia to respond. They are dictating tempo on multiple fronts simultaneously. Drone campaigns in the south, cruise missile strikes far behind the front line, and ground pressure along the eastern axis. That is a fundamentally different war than the one most Western analysts were describing even 6 months ago. The narrative of inevitable Ukrainian defeat that was circulating in certain political circles in Washington and Brussels has quietly disappeared, because the battlefield facts no longer support it. Meanwhile, Russia has been signaling its own intentions to escalate. Senior Russian military officials issued warnings earlier this week to foreign ambassadors, advising them to evacuate diplomatic personnel from Kyiv, stating that a major strike on the Ukrainian capital could be carried out at any moment. In the days following that warning, Russia launched Orishnik hypersonic ballistic missiles, Shahed drones, and additional ballistic weapons against civilian areas in Kyiv. Russian state media confirmed this was deliberate targeting, not just military infrastructure, but the city itself. The message from Moscow was unmistakable. We will hit wherever we want, whenever we want, and no one is going to stop us. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking at a high-level meeting with Swedish officials, made an urgent appeal that cut through diplomatic language entirely. His message was simple. Right now, at this moment, diplomacy alone cannot stop Russia. The only thing limiting Russian advances is Ukrainian military pressure. To maintain that pressure, Ukraine needs more tools, specifically more Patriot anti-ballistic missile batteries, more PAC-3 interceptors, or alternatively, production licenses that would allow Ukraine to build these systems domestically and potentially supply allied nations by June. It was a direct, urgent, and specific request. Whether Washington is listening is another matter entirely. Former European Army Commander Ben Hodges offered a sharp observation about the shifting political tone in Washington. He noted that Trump has recently softened his language on Ukraine, calling Zelensky not such a bad guy, and expressing what appeared to be genuine admiration for the way Ukrainian forces have been fighting. Hodges' interpretation: Trump has finally started seeing what military analysts have known for months, that Ukraine is not losing. In fact, in key sectors, Ukraine is winning, and Trump, true to form, wants to align himself with the winning side before the outcome becomes undeniable. Whether that shift in tone translates into actual policy support remains to be seen. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, addressed the alliance at a preparatory summit in Sweden ahead of the main NATO gathering. His assessment was careful but pointed. The front lines are stabilizing. In net terms, Ukraine is recovering territory. Not massively, but the direction of movement has reversed. The line is no longer moving west to east. It is moving east to west. Ukraine is pushing back. Rutte credited Ukrainian ingenuity, particularly in drone technology and counter-drone warfare. He noted that NATO has established a dedicated joint technology center in Poland, specifically to capture lessons from this conflict and embed them into alliance-wide doctrine. What Ukraine has learned on the battlefield is now shaping how NATO prepares for future conflicts. That is not a small thing. It is worth pausing on that point, because it represents one of the most underreported stories of this entire conflict. NATO entered this war watching from the sidelines, supplying weapons and intelligence, but fundamentally uncertain about how a modern large-scale land war in Europe would actually unfold. Ukraine has now provided the most detailed and hard-won answer to that question that any military planner could ask for. Drone warfare, electronic countermeasures, decentralized command structures, the role of commercial satellite imagery, the vulnerability of armor to loitering munitions. All of it is being studied, documented, and built into NATO planning in real time. In a deeply painful way, Ukraine is making NATO stronger. The least NATO can do is make sure Ukraine survives long enough for that knowledge to matter. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, also at the Sweden gathering, delivered what amounted to a quiet retreat from American diplomatic engagement. He acknowledged the U.S. got involved in peace discussions because it was told it was the only party both sides would deal with. He said those talks produced nothing. He said Washington remains open to a constructive role, but is not interested in endless meetings that lead nowhere. He added that the war will have to end through negotiation, not military victory in the traditional sense. What he did not provide was any concrete plan, any new framework, or any signal that a genuine diplomatic push is imminent. It was a door left open, but only barely, and from a considerable distance. Compare that to what Donald Trump promised repeatedly on the campaign trail. If elected, he would end this war in 24 hours. One day. He said it at rallies. He said it in debates. He said it in interviews. It became one of his signature lines. That was a campaign promise. This is the reality. A NATO ally just took a Russian drone strike, and the administration that promised to end the war in a day has not said a single word about it. The larger strategic question here is what this moment reveals about where we actually are. Russia is probing. Incrementally. Drone debris in Romania 1 month, a direct hit on an apartment building the next. Each incident just below the threshold of a response that would carry real consequences. Moscow is running an experiment in real time, testing how much it can do before NATO moves from statements to action. And so far, the results of that experiment have been encouraging for the Kremlin. Romania has been a firm and consistent NATO ally. Earlier this year, the country held a presidential election that drew international attention. Nicusor Dan, a pro-European, pro-NATO, pro-Ukraine independent, defeated a far-right nationalist challenger backed by Russia-friendly political forces in a decisive runoff. Young Romanians turned out in large numbers, making a clear statement about which direction they want their country to face. Romania borders the Black Sea. It borders Ukraine directly. It has supported Kiev consistently throughout this conflict, accepted Ukrainian refugees, and stood with its European partners at every major decision point. And now its citizens are being pulled out of burning buildings because a Russian drone flew 13 kilometers over an international border and no one stopped it. We are going to stay on this story. We will tell you if Article 4 gets formally invoked. We will tell you if the North Atlantic Council convenes. We will tell you if Washington finally breaks its silence. And we will give you the full strategic context every step of the way, because this matters far beyond Romania and far beyond Ukraine. What happens next will tell us something fundamental about whether the security architecture that has kept large-scale war out of Europe for 80 years still holds. That is the story, and it is just getting started. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. You are going to want to be here for what comes next.